Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City of Alameda Mayor's COVID-19 Town Hall. I'm Sarah Henry, the city's Public Information Officer. Today, the mayor has invited Alameda Police Chief Paul Rolleri to join her to discuss Alameda Police Department policies and training. Please note, all participants have been muted. To submit a question for the mayor or the police chief, please use the chat feature. I'd now like to turn today's town hall over to Mayor Marilyn Ezzy Ashcraft.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today, whether you're on Zoom or Facebook Live. And I also want to welcome and thank our special guest, Alameda Police Chief Paul Rolleri. So as many of you who've joined me before know, this is normally the mayor's COVID-19 town hall to keep my residents and businesses informed and up to date on COVID-19 issues. But I was up late last night, as I'm sure many of you were, watching the news and the tragic events or the events following a tragic incident in Minneapolis this past week unfold. And it just struck me that today wasn't the day to talk about COVID testing and getting your children vaccinated. That can wait. It's important, but that can wait. And so I reached out to our police chief, and he very graciously agreed to come on and answer some questions that we've seen on social media that people have about Alameda Police Department's use of force policies and the kinds of training our officers get. But I want to open this segment with reading from a message that former President Barack Obama posted this morning. And in times like this, in my humble opinion, no one says it better. And so what former President Obama said is that it's natural for us to wish for life to, quote, just get back to normal, close quote, as a pandemic and economic crisis upend everything around us. But we have to remember that for millions of Americans, being treated differently on account of race is tragically, painfully, maddeningly, quote, normal. Whether it's while dealing with the healthcare system or interacting with the criminal justice system or jogging down the street or just watching birds in a park. This shouldn't be normal in 2020 America. It can't be normal. If we want our children to grow up in a nation that lives up to its highest ideals, we can and must do better, be better. It will fall mainly on the officials of Minnesota to ensure that the circumstances surrounding George Floyd's death are investigated thoroughly and that justice is ultimately done. But it falls on all of us, regardless of race or station, including the majority of men and women in law enforcement who take pride in doing their tough job the right way every day, to work together to create a new normal in which the legacy of bigotry and unequal treatment no longer infects our institutions or our hearts. So I am proud to serve in a city and work with a police chief who I have gotten to know very well over the years, who I know to be a very progressive individual and police chief. He's currently the president of the Police Chiefs Association of Alameda County. But I'm going to let him do the talking and answer questions that you would like to submit. And I just feel that there are times when you need to have the tough conversations, and we don't need to skate around things that are happening around us. And I think this is a great opportunity for you to get to hear from our police chief. So with that, Chief Rolleri, again, thank you for being here, taking time out of what I know has been a busy couple of days for you. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Hello, everybody. Thank you for jumping on, I think, relatively short notice. I appreciate the opportunity that the Mayor extended and to talk with some of you about what's been going on, not only in Minnesota, but when things like this happen, and unfortunately they've they've happened a little too often. Questions arise locally. An incident can happen 2,000 or 3,000 miles away, and people wonder, well, could that happen here? And what are we doing to make sure that that doesn't happen in Alameda or in the Bay Area? So first, let me start off by saying that I've been in law enforcement for 31 years, 28 years here in Alameda, and anybody that's been a police officer for longer than the time it takes to have a cup of coffee could tell you that there's no training that any of us are aware of that would authorize the tactics that were used by the Minneapolis officer kneeling on George Floyd's neck after he was handcuffed and by the looks of the video, not resisting. It's a gut punch, and I appreciated President Obama's remarks that the vast majority of law enforcement officers across the country, and certainly in Alameda, try to do the right thing the right way every single day. And when things like this happen, nobody really notices the patch on their shoulder. They see the uniform and the badge, and it represents a larger systemic problem in our country that we all would like to fix so that we don't have to go through this again. So with that said, there's some things that popped up on Facebook and some questions that I've received during the week. So I'm just going to give you a quick structural setup and try to not get too far into the weeds and then let you all ask the questions. All police departments in California, including ours, fall under some certification and training guidelines that are provided by an organization called POST, Peace Officer Standards and Training. It is a state agency funded through the budget that's approved by the governor. And they set standards. Some are set legislatively, some are set by POST, and they determine hiring standards, training standards, training that is mandatory versus training that is optional at all ranks. So from the brand new police officers in the police academy all the way up to and including executive level training like I would go to as the chief. Those standards can change again as legislative mandates occur. And then individual departments like ours, as the chief, I have the ability to make certain training mandatory here within my agency, even if it's not mandated by law. So we follow the standards that are set by POST. POST comes through the state. For those of you who don't know, the state comes through here at least once a year, and they audit our hiring and our training records to make sure that we are in fact doing the training that we are required to do, and that it's done within the timeframes that are set by the mandates. And that happens every single year. This year is going to be a little interesting because some training has had to go by the wayside these past few months due to the COVID crisis. But that doesn't mean that it goes away. It's just been the last few months that we've all the training has kind of been set to the side. In the city of Alameda, or at the police department, we have a policy manual, and it's a voluminous document. It's very thick if you had a printed copy of it. It is published on our website. It's publicly available. Every single policy that the Alameda Police Department has is on the city's website, on the police department's page specifically. And on in that document, you will see all of our policies, like I mentioned, but we also have in there a use of force policy. We have policies about citizen complaints, about racial profiling, use of force, and discipline. And any of you are welcome to go on there anytime and take a look at that policy to see what we are doing and maybe what we're not doing. There's a company called Lexipol that I think sometimes receives some criticism because people feel that it is kind of a cookie cutter method of setting policy. There are many, many agencies in California who use Lexapol, and we are one of them. I would say, I'm not in the business of defending anybody, but I will say that compared to how we did our policies 30 years ago when I was a brand new officer, this is a much better and more current system of doing things. The Lexapol policies incorporate federal law and state law into the policies, and then also give agencies the ability to customize for any local issues that they might want to address. So on the one hand, yes, they do put out a policy that is sent to agencies on a subscription basis. But as the chief executive of the police department, I have the ability to say, well, we're not going to do that, or we are going to add something to the policy. The state and federal mandates, I don't have any control over. So those things always stay in the policy. And then there's some customization that can happen. Clearly, there are some policies that are more critical than others. Most of you don't care what color, what shade of blue our uniforms are, or how the shoes have to be polished and some things like that. But you have great interest and care, as you should, in our use of force policies, racial profiling, our arrest control practices, how we document incidents, and how we are held accountable when we don't rise up to the standard that you all expect and deserve. So with all of that, one other thing I would add is that some people have said, well, what happens if an officer violates the policy? And I'm sure I'll be answering some more questions here in a minute. There are a couple different layers. So, and I'll quickly use the Minneapolis example. So there is clearly a criminal investigation. And for those of you who haven't heard, in the last hour, they announced that the Minneapolis officer has been charged and arrested. So he has criminal charges now pending against him. Separately, within the police department, there is an administrative process that happens. Now, in this case, they fired him within, I think, 24 or 36 hours of when the incident occurred. So there are oftentimes concurrent and but separate investigations that go on. The internal ones are administrative, employment-related policy issues, and on cases where there's a death or a serious injury or the possibility of a criminal act on the part of a police officer, the district attorney or the state's attorney or the FBI will get involved, and they will criminally investigate those charges. So concurrent but separate investigations with separate considerations and focus. So that's going to happen in Minneapolis. That's what would happen here if God forbid we had something like that. So I'll let that sort of be the starting point, and then if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Chief, I'm going to just jump in. Can you just touch briefly on some things I often get questions about, including the use of body-worn cameras, and tell us a little bit about some of the training that your officers receive.
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, we do have body-worn cameras in Alameda. We've had them for about, I think we're coming up on 5 years now that we've had the cameras. The policy for the use of those cameras is in the policy document that I told you about that's on the website. When we first bought the cameras and we wrote the initial policy, it was the use of the cameras on the part of the officers was encouraged but not always mandated. We wanted them to use it, but there was a lot more discretion that was written into the policy. About 1.5 years ago, I had an internal change of heart, and on my own, as I can do, I went into the Lexapol policy and modified it to make the activations of the camera mandatory. There are some exceptions. There's no cookie cutter way to say, okay, as soon as you leave the building, you have to have your camera on for your entire 10-hour shift, and it can never be turned off. There are exceptions in the policy. There are some may activates versus shalls, but the majority of public law enforcement interactions by our officers are mandated recordings. They are shalls. Some of the mays might be, so for example, if we have a police officer at a city council meeting, I do not mandate that they record what's happening at the city council meeting. There's video of that available elsewhere anyway. If they are standing in line to get lunch at a deli or at the Starbucks, I do not expect them to have their cameras on if a citizen is having a casual conversation with them. If they get a call for service and they are responding to a call for service, I expect that the camera is going to be turned on, and so that if not before, that certainly after they get out of the car, anything that they do in the process of investigating that crime will be recorded on a camera. There's consequence for them in the policy if they don't do it. Just like with any other place of employment, we have progressive discipline. So if somebody forgets to turn their camera on, or they just don't turn it on, and it's a relatively minor infraction, then it may be a counseling session, a training session to get them to do the right thing. If it's repeated violations, or if it's something flagrant, things can go all the way up to and including suspensions or terminations, which is also true in other policies. So I don't, if an officer fails to record a certain call or a traffic stop one day, I'm not going to automatically fire them, right? We want compliance with the policy. So that's what we try to gain through the use of progressive discipline. Some people have been under the mistaken impression that the policy that was written 5 years ago exists today, and it does not. Like I said, in January of 2019, I modified the policy to incorporate a lot of shalls into the policy. And again, you're all welcome to hop online during this call or afterwards and take a look at it. As far as the training goes, critical incident training or de-escalation training is not mandatory in California, nor is implicit bias training. However, I am happy to say that we've incorporated those here for the last, I've been the chief for 7 years, coming up here in a couple of weeks. We've been doing the de-escalation training, crisis intervention training for the past 7 or 8 years. At one point, we had, I think, 96 or 95% of our sworn personnel had been through the training. That changes as people leave the department, retire, and we hire new people on. But the goal that I've had is that every single person here will have gone through that 40-hour training, even though it's not mandated by the state. And that includes up to and including the command staff and me. I'm not out doing actual real police work these days. I haven't been for many years, but I feel it's important that if my officers are going to go through the training, that I'm going to do the same thing that they're doing. The goal is to put them all first because they're out there doing the job, and then we'll get to the command staff. Those are limited spaces. We get two slots per class, and so it takes a while to get through it all for everybody. But we've been doing that for years. And I believe that Sarah posted online on the Facebook feed earlier a video about that training, which actually features some footage from Alameda and an interview with a younger me explaining about how that course works. Implicit bias training, that's something that's relatively new to law enforcement in California in terms of the label. When Kamala Harris was still the Attorney General in California back in 2015, she partnered with California Post and developed the first implicit bias training specifically tailored for law enforcement. And that course was designed late in 2015. It was not then, nor is it now, a mandatory training in California, but I've put all of my officers through it. We actually found early on an instructor from the University of California, Los Angeles, who was qualified and certified to teach the course to law enforcement. And I paid his tab and flew him up here for 3 days. And he trained our entire police department in a 3-day period several years ago. And then as we get new people on board, we will send them to the training whenever we can. So I'm proud to say that we've been doing that for a while, even though it's not mandated. I think the results have been positive for us. We have very few uses of force in Alameda relative to the number of calls for service and the number of arrests we make every year. So for example, in any given year, you would probably see, if you looked at our data, we probably have between 60 and 65,000 calls for service every year in any calendar year. Of those, maybe 3,000 to 3,500 will result in some sort of an arrest. And of all of those cases and all of those calls and all of those arrests, we use force in less than 1% of those incidents. To the tune of maybe on average, if you went back and looked the last 5 or 10 years, somewhere between 20 and 30 uses of force per year, with a police force authorized at 88 and 65,000 calls for service. 0 would be a great number. I don't know that that's a realistic one to ever get to. I'm pretty happy that 20 to 30 is about where we land every year. I don't like to jinx it. I'm superstitious, but we have not had a police-involved shooting in 15 years. The last one was in 2005. So I'm pretty proud of the work that's been done here. We are not perfect. We're dealing with human beings in dynamic situations, doing a very tough job under very tough circumstances. They're not perfect. They do make mistakes. And when we do, it's my job to own up to them and to correct them and to hold people accountable when that happens. So anyway, I don't mean to go on too far about that, but hopefully that's helpful to everyone.
Thanks, Chief. And if you have any salt, maybe you could just throw a little over your shoulder right now. So Sarah, do we have questions coming for the Chief?
Lots of questions for the Chief and for you, Mayor, too.
And for me. Okay.
I'll start with the kind of the Chief related questions and then go to the kind of more COVID related questions at the end. So the first question, Chief, is what role will your team play tonight during the scheduled Oakland demonstration at 8 o'clock tonight?
That's unknown right now. We have been contacted by the County of Alameda. So real quick background, when there's a large scale unplanned event like a demonstration, the police department where the incident is happening, in this case Oakland, will contact the county and make a mutual aid request or an inquiry in the event that other people are needed. So we've been over there before when things have happened. I'm sure that Oakland is working on an operations plan right now in the event that they do have the planned protest tonight, which I expect is going to happen. If we are asked to go down there, we will probably, depending on our staffing, we will probably try to send about a dozen police officers over there if they're needed. Of course, I'm hoping that they aren't, but if they are, we will. I would probably have about a dozen available. And then what they do when they get there is dependent on where they're assigned by the host agency. So when we get there, if Oakland needs us, they would deploy us wherever the situation requires. It's kind of a fluid situation. I would add that when a police department like ours responds to a large-scale event in another city like that, we are going to be of support to the law enforcement agency, hopefully to facilitate peaceful protests. But sometimes when when criminal acts happen, if there's assaults, vandalisms, things of that nature, sometimes arrests do need to be made at these protests. We are going to support other police officers. It's not a political stance on how we feel about what happened at the beginning of this thing. And I hope people can understand and make the distinction, much like we would want other agencies to come to Alameda and help us if we needed the help. So it's in that spirit that we would be going over there tonight if we were asked.
And then somebody asked a follow-up question. Would there ever be an option to close off the island in anticipation? I
don't see that as ever being a realistic option. There's always been this urban myth and legend that we somehow have the magical ability to push a button and raise the bridges and close off Alameda. It's just that, it's an urban legend. A lot of people don't even realize that the bridges aren't operated by the city of Alameda, they're operated by the county. And the raising and lowering of the bridges are dictated by guidelines issued by the Coast Guard, by the U.S. Coast Guard, because it goes over the water. So no, the short answer is no, we would not do that.
Here's another question. Is there any training specifically on racial profiling during this time?
During this time, I mean, right now at this minute, no, we're not doing that. We do have, racial profiling is something that is part of the police academy training that new officers get. We have done the implicit bias training, certainly covers the component of race. It also covers other areas as well. We have a policy that prohibits racial profiling in our policy manual. Again, you know, we in Alameda and in other agencies, what we try to teach our officers is to pay attention to behavior and not appearance. So a person walking down the street, and I would say this to all of you as residents too, because we get these calls. There's a suspicious person walking down my street. Well, if the suspicious person is just walking down the street and they're on the sidewalk and they're not doing anything, that does not make them suspicious. If that same person comes up the driveway between two homes and you know that the residents aren't there and that's not your neighbor, and they appear to be going into the backyard of that home and you know that they don't live there, that would be a phone call to the police department, right? Because now you're responding to a behavior and not to the appearance of a person. People may shock you to know this, that in 2020 in Alameda, as progressive a city as this is, that we get calls like that sometimes. And when you press people as to what was suspicious about the call, the answers are not usually satisfactory. Unfortunately, the dispatchers don't have the ability at the point of the phone call, because they're not there, to know what calls should be put in the dumpster and which ones should be dispatched. So they have to send an officer, and then we rely on the experience and training of our officers to figure out the calls that actually require us versus the ones that don't.
Chief, someone's asked, if an officer is fired, is their badge permanently removed, or could they possibly be hired in another city?
That's a good question. Typically, so could they be hired in another city? The short answer is yes, it's possible. Is it likely? No, it is not likely. In California, there's no, like, for example, if let's say an officer was fired in another city, I don't know, pick one, and Fresno, and that officer got fired for excessive force or for lying on a police report, or was convicted of a crime. And then they came up here and they tried to become a police officer in Alameda. We do a very thorough background check. One of those background checks is, if they're coming from another agency, they sign a release for us to look at their personnel file from the agency that the last agency that they worked for, or any others that they've worked for. And of course, during that investigation, we would find out if they've been arrested and convicted of a crime. We would find out if they had been fired because of excessive force, or for doing something that was racist, or for any number of things. And we wouldn't hire them. I mean, we just wouldn't hire them. For some of you who may have heard me in public meetings before, I've talked about this a bunch of times. We are down 16 police officer positions today as we're having this conversation. I would rather be down 16 officers and have vacancies than hire one officer in a sloppy manner who would bring discredit upon the department. It's not a perfect process. We, you know, in any line of work, I don't care what you do, there's going to be people that do things that they're not supposed to do after you hire them. But I can assure you, for what it's worth, that we do thorough backgrounds on every single person that we hire, even if they're coming from another police agency. And we try to vet all of that out. So if there's a problem, I'll take a pass.
Somebody's asked if there's something you can do to prioritize or even require the anti-bias training for officers, which I know you've discussed. And then another question came in asking how often is the anti-bias training done?
So some training is done periodically. Other training, like the bias training, it's actually, remember, like I said, it's not even technically required to happen. So typically, for that particular training, they go through it once. We might do some refresher training every once in a while. There'll be some we call them lineup trainings or briefing trainings that happen in 15 or 30-minute increments before they go out into the street. But it's not a revolving, ongoing training as it pertains to the implicit bias stuff and the racial profiling. It's usually, most of the time, it's once. There might be another one, like a refresher later on. It's funny, like domestic violence training, for example, we have to go through that every couple of years, which is a state mandate. So some training is required to happen all the time or throughout your career, and others, it's kind of I don't want to diminish it to say one and done, but you're only required to do it once.
What are the steps that APD takes to build connections within the community?
So that one is the easiest thing that we do. The easiest thing we do is the contacts that we may have in the community every day. So again, I've been here 28 years, and the idea of the police officers staying in their cars and driving around and responding to calls for service and thinking that you're somehow going to have a good relationship with your community it's a joke. You have to get out of your car and you have to talk to people, not just when you're there on a call, but just sometimes to say hi, to stick your head into business, to approach people when you're not in enforcement mode, and just have conversations with people and let them understand that you're a human being too. That I'll tell you a quick story. I went to a Unity barbecue at Crab Cove a couple, I don't know, three, four years ago now, and I went in blue jeans and a polo shirt, and somebody said to me, "Oh my God, you wore shoes, or you wore jeans." You know what? I wasn't expecting that, and it was funny. But you take it for granted, and people think that we're always wearing our uniforms, and we don't. But just something simple like showing up to a community barbecue with blue jeans on and a polo shirt somehow made a connection with some of the folks that were at that event. So just little common everyday things, and the way you treat people and the way you talk to them makes a huge difference. The Citizen Police Academy that we run twice a year is another way that we reach out to the community. And then I don't like to pat myself on the back, but one of the best hires that I've made since I've been here is a woman named Michaela Parker, who does our social media work. If you don't follow us on Facebook or Instagram or any of that, I would highly recommend that you friend us. And she does amazing work communicating with the public on behalf of the police department and highlighting the good work that's being done every day. And I'm so grateful for her being here. She's really good at what she does. So those are just a few of the things that we do.
I just have to chime in about Michaela because I'm a huge Michaela fan, and she grew up in Alameda, was a basketball star at Alameda High, and I think went on to coach there. And yes, we are very lucky to have her with the police department.
Chief, here's a question saying that the Minneapolis Police Department has had de-escalation training since 2017, but it didn't prevent what happened. How are you ensuring the psychological fitness of our APD beyond these policies?
So that's a good question. We have internally, we have something called a peer support unit. So we're doing, we constantly, if we have an officer that we think might be struggling, there's peer outreach that happens here internally. And I also contract out with a mental health professional for cases when we feel that an officer might benefit from from going to see. Now, we can't always force people to go see somebody and to go get help. But we monitor their work product, right? So that's why I have sergeants or street supervisors who are monitoring what their officers are doing every single day during their shift. When we have uses of force, we track those things. So we have a software system here. It's called IA Pro, or Internal Affairs Pro, and we track in a software program our use of force incidents. And if we have an officer that is popping up, if it happens where, oh look, Officer Smith or Officer Jones is popping up, they've had 3 uses of force in the last month, and we only have 30 for the whole year, we'll take a deeper dive and look and see if there's an issue there that we might need to address. So it's a constant monitoring thing, and we do have the outreach that we provide to them for mental health. We had just real quickly, I'll tell you, 2 weeks ago, we had 2 officers get dispatched to what turned out to be a mental health call at the historic Alameda High School, and a gentleman who I think might have been in his 60s anyway he had already stabbed himself several times before the officers got there, and did it again before he was standing at the top of the stairs and they were at the bottom of the stairs. And unfortunately, within just a few seconds of them starting to talk to him, he jumped from the second-story landing at the high school, and he wound up dying. So a pretty horrific event for anybody to see, even a veteran police officer. They both seem to be doing okay, but I just, as an example, I had him stay home. I gave him a day off on the chief, not as a reward, but because I know from personal experience that those things can take a toll on you. And even these tough exterior police officers with lots of training and experience, there's really nothing that can prepare you for the sight of somebody jumping to their death in front of you. They're both doing okay. It's tragic and sad that the gentleman took his own life. But the worst thing that I think I could have done was to put him back out on the street the next day like nothing happened. So we do try to pay attention to that stuff and take care of our people.
Someone asked, is the kind of knee chokehold that we saw in the video in Minneapolis, is that banned in California or in Alameda?
Not only is it banned, it's not taught. There's no training course that I've ever seen or am aware of. And granted, different states have different training standards. I've never once been to a class where that is taught, and it's not authorized. And I'll tell you that if that happened here, that officer would be fired here as well and criminally prosecuted.
This is from a bit ago, so they're asking if you can break down the policy in cases of inappropriate force or misconduct.
Break it down. So the standard in use of force has changed over the years. Generally, and I'm trying to not get too far into the weeds. Generally, in California and in the United States, the use of force is authorized to the extent that the police officer is able to overcome resistance. So if somebody is punching someone and you can't get them to stop, and you grab their hands and you handcuff them, that is reasonable. The courts would generally say, well, that was reasonable. The person was hitting somebody else and the police officer stopped them from doing that. If a person, I'm just using an example, I'm pulling this off my head, so forgive me, but if somebody is violating the City of Alameda smoking ordinance and they're smoking in front of a store at South Shore, and the police officer tells them to put the cigarette out and put it out, and the person says no, and the police officer hits them, that would be excessive force. You can't, the fact that the person doesn't do what the officer says right away does not mean that the officer gets to use force. If the officer is being attacked, if he's being hit or she's being hit, struck, if somebody's got a knife or they're shooting a gun, I mean, they are allowed to escalate the force that they need to overcome that resistance to protect themselves or to protect somebody else from injury or death. That is the basic standard by which these things are looked at. California law has changed recently, just January 1st. Shirley Weber from Southern California introduced AB 932, which changed the way that use of force, especially deadly force, is viewed by the courts, by the criminal courts. And we have incorporated that law into our policy. And so I hope I'm answering the question and I didn't stray too far off of it.
Somebody is asking, and you just answered this a bit ago, but the kind of scheduled psych evaluations that happen for those working in this highly stressful job, how extensive it is. They also asked what protections are in place for whistleblowers alerting superiors to potentially biased or dangerous behavior within the ranks.
So that's also a good question. It's codified in both state and federal law. There's whistleblower protections. It's also included in our policy. We have a anti-retaliation, no retaliation policy. We expect, and officers are required by policy to intercede when another officer is doing something that they're not supposed to be doing, say an excessive force incident. So we do have the same whistleblower protections that all of you have in your workplaces, both federal and state law. And then that's also codified in our policy.
This one's pretty long, and so I'm just going to read it straight from the chat. It says, 6 days ago in the early morning, an incident was reported on the Alameda Reddit of a Black man walking and exercising in the street who is known to work out in the area and who was stopped and questioned by police for more than an hour. Speculation by the original poster that it was after somebody called in to report them. Account of it was posted in real time on social media where it sounds as if neighbors had to come out to the defense of him. Was this incident reported to your office and was it investigated?
So yeah, that incident happened and came to my attention a few days ago. I am still in the process of looking into it. We did get a call for service. A citizen called to report that the gentleman was in the street. And according to the person that called, they were concerned that because the gentleman was in the street, that he possibly was either intoxicated or possibly was suffering from some mental illness. So that was what was told to the dispatcher and what the dispatcher broadcast to the patrol officer that responded. The officer did contact and talk to the gentleman who was African American. In the middle of the street. I think this happened around the 21 or 2200 block of Central, which would be kind of near Walnut, for those of you who don't know those blocks. So right around Central and Walnut in that area. It turned out he did live in the area. He shouldn't have been in the middle of the street. The officer did try to talk to him about that and eventually wound up detaining him in handcuffs. He was there for, I don't know that it was an hour. I think it was close to maybe 45 minutes or something like that. He was issued a citation and he was sent on his way after that. I'm still looking at that case. So it'd be, I haven't really gotten to the bottom of it yet. To be completely honest, I'm not sure that, that was probably one where we would have been better off maybe just having a quick conversation and encouraging him to get out of the street and then letting him be on his way. But again, I haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet because it's only been a few days since it came past me.
How can law enforcement in Alameda County and I guess city too help make people of color feel safe?
Well, so trust and cooperation are the pillars of any police department. I mean, if we don't have the confidence and the trust of the people that we are serving, we're not very legitimate. We're not going to be very effective. The community isn't going to be safe. The community isn't going to feel safe. The community isn't going to feel protected. The only way that we can do it is by our deeds and our words and our actions, what we do every day. And when something happens like what occurred in Minneapolis, and there certainly have been other incidents, that undermines that trust and cooperation. It delegitimizes how people view the police, not just in the city where it happened, but all over the country. And I'm being completely honest with everybody here. It's a gut punch because, like President Obama said, the vast majority of the 1 million police officers in this country do the right thing for the right reason, the right way every single day. And nobody ever hears about that. Very, very seldomly. When something goes wrong, it's highlighted, and as it should be. But you can spend years building trust and cooperation and relationships in your community, and you can have it all destroyed by one incident. And I'm afraid that that's pretty much what's happening here. And so all I can say is, in deeds and in action, we just continue to work to be better. We, as a profession, we are better than we were 5 years ago, and we're better than we were 5 years ago, but 5 years before that. I've seen immense changes in the way that policing is done in the 31 years that I've been a police officer. I've seen immense positive changes in Alameda, just the way we do our work here. Are we perfect? No. Do we make mistakes? Absolutely we do. But through deeds and action, right? It's one thing to say the right thing. I could sit here for another hour and talk. It means nothing if we're not doing it. So it's time, and it's repetition, and it's relationship building.
I just want to add, I'm only saying the questions, and there are a lot of comments in here, Chief, that are very thankful to our police department, to our officers, to you as Chief. And so I just want to make sure that you know that, because they're hidden, but they're there, and that appreciation is felt.
I'm going to just throw in a comment in the margins here. One of the things that I'm really proud of with the Alameda Police Department is that if you looked at the composition of the officers who make up our police force, it is a diverse police force. We have men and women. We have numerous ethnic representation. We have multiple languages spoken. And I think that that's certainly a part of effective policing, is that people come from different backgrounds, their different experiences, and that just enriches a police department when they're out on the streets. We just had Don Oyang. What was his rank when he retired, Chief? Captain Oyang. And I remember him telling me one time that he grew up, Chinese American, grew up in Oakland. He didn't much like the police when he was growing up in Oakland. I didn't quite get the story of how he ended up being a police officer for 30 years, 33 or whatever it was. But he was a wonderful and bilingual addition to the force, and we've got a number of those examples.
Yeah. So, in Mayor, I would add, and to people in the community, if you looked at a photograph of the police department on the front steps of City Hall 50 years ago, or even when I got hired, it's a different looking department. Well, first of all, there's a lot fewer of us. There was 111 when I got hired. We're at 73 right now and authorized for 88. The diversity in the police department is something that I do pay attention to, and the chiefs before me have as well. We are rarely perfectly in sync with the demographics of Alameda. And the percentages, if you looked at them, they'll vary a little bit depending on what time of the year it is, who's retiring and who we're hiring. for example, across the country, law enforcement is generally comprised of about 12% women. And for many years, we've been right around 12 to 14%. Today, we're down maybe to like 10%, but one or two hires when we're talking about 88 people can make a huge difference. We have some work to do with some demographics. African American is one of them. But we are, as the mayor mentioned, a much more diverse police department today than we were even when I was first hired.
Mayor, I'm just going to ask a couple of questions back to the regularly scheduled program, COVID.
Sure.
There are a few in here. The first one was asking, when will the Alameda Strong website be up and running? And Ron Mooney answered that on Facebook to provide the link. But if you want to talk a little bit about Alameda Strong, that'd be great.
I would love to talk about Alameda Strong because we are. One of the things that the City Council and working with our business associations has done recently, and this wasn't our original idea. We patterned this after some of our neighboring cities. The city of Berkeley, Oakland's done this, and some cities around the state are starting to do this. Our residents need help, our small businesses, our nonprofit organizations, they're suffering from the shelter in place. I mean, it's very important that we continue to maintain the shelter in place because, as you may know, our county numbers just keep climbing. We have not flattened the curve in Alameda County, and we need to do that. But in the meantime, businesses have been closed or just partially opened, restaurants for takeout and delivery only. So the City Council approved, and it's been launched, a community fund called Alameda Strong. And the website, did you put it here? Yes, Sarah's amazing. It's alamedastrong.org. So you can go to that website and your contributions, and you can direct them to one of three buckets, one or more of three buckets, or just generally, will go to help our small local businesses, our nonprofit organizations, and our residential renters. For the residential renters, they can receive a month's, well, the fund would pay 1 month up to, I think, a maximum of $3,500. It has to match the amount of rent you pay. And there's criteria. You have to be able to show that you've been severely impacted by the COVID crisis, and that money is paid directly to your landlord. So this is also a help to, especially our small mom and pop landlords in Alameda, because the council has approved deferring rent, that both residential and commercial renters can defer their rent payments for 3 months, because if you're not bringing in income, it's very hard to pay those expenses. And yet especially our small mom and pop landlords still have the mortgage. Well, hopefully they've worked out some plan with their mortgage lender, but they've got property taxes, they've got insurance. So the idea is that we just want to help our community survive this crisis right now, while we still haven't been able to open up fully. And one of the things you can all do, and I happen to think Alamedans are doing spectacularly well, because relatively speaking, we've got one of the lowest per capita rates of COVID-19 in the county, but don't get too excited about that, because even our numbers keep going up ever so slowly, and we've got to flatten them, and then we've got to send them down. But the more we can do this, the more we can gently remind other people, wear your mask in public, stay 6 feet from the next person who doesn't live in your household. The sooner we can the public health officer for the county can loosen these restrictions, but they can't do that until it's safe for us to be out and about. But that's how we can help our fellow Alamedans and our businesses and our nonprofit organizations. So thank you for being the rock stars that you are. I know you weren't the ones dropping litter all over the beach on the weekend. I know this. We're out of towners, right?
Chief, here's a question for you. What is APD doing to address the increasing reports of crime, for example, car thefts and vandalism?
So that's an interesting one. I am kind of happy to tell everybody that the sort of silver lining of the COVID crisis, as far as crime goes, is that for the most part, things have dropped significantly, and I say that not to diminish the person who asked the question's concerns, because we still do have crime in Alameda for sure, and most of it is property crime. Since the start of the pandemic, or actually, let me go back even to the start of the year, but especially after March 16th when the first shelter-in-place order was issued. Crime in Alameda, the serious crimes categories, is down 22 or 23% over the same time period last year. So through the first 4 months of 2020. The one notable and unfortunate exception has been domestic violence calls, which have gone up something like 40% for us since the start of the year. Other crimes, including auto theft, were down as much as 30% through April. But the last 3 weeks have not been good. When the May stats come out, and I probably won't have them for probably until the first or second week of June, I'm expecting to see that number will have gone up. Catalytic converter thefts and auto thefts have been and continue to be a problem for us. Now I'll take the property crimes over the violent crimes, but that is definitely something that we're taking a look at. Several years ago, well, it's probably been 3 or 4 years ago now, I put out a crime graph going back 30 years. And if you look at it, crime in Alameda is definitely down over the numbers that we saw in the mid to late 90s and even the early 2000s. The last 6 or 7 years, we've been fairly flat at the bottom of the chart. We do have little spikes. Property crimes is a big deal here, but right now, those things are mostly down.
Mayor, back to you. A couple of questions with regards to reopening Alameda. First, easy one. When are we going to reopen Alameda? And then second, timeline specifically for haircuts and salons reopening.
So on the when are we going to reopen, I keep looking for my crystal ball and I keep not locating it. But what it would tell me and what I know is that the public health officers are looking at data, not dates. And so they have their criteria, and it is a balance that, you know, they realize that as they start to open things up, like right now we are all in Alameda County, we're in early stage 2 of the governor's 4-stage plan to reopen California. Some counties are a little ahead of us because those counties have flattened their curve of COVID cases. So but we know that as we open say construction activities 2 weeks after construction was allowed, full construction activities were allowed, we saw this increase in COVID rates. And also we've seen the highest rate of hospitalizations in Alameda County since the shelter-in-place order went into effect. And so now we're looking to see, well, now that we're opening retail for curbside delivery, how will that impact the curve? And it takes 2 weeks, 10 to 14 days, because that's the the outer edge of the outer limit of the incubation period. That's not to say that the public health officers expect perfection and it's got to be 0 or we're not going to open, because right now as we speak they're working on their guidelines for opening summer camp programs, not sleepaway but like day camp and summer activities for kids. It's so important for our children, for their physical and mental health, and I think their parents' mental health, to be able to get out and do some of these activities. So things are moving along carefully. Barbershops and hair salons, I haven't had a chance to look, but and Sarah's probably more up to date on. I think the governor made some order, issued some order, but I'm pretty sure Alameda County, San Francisco, I don't think we're moving into that. What is it, Sarah? Do you know?
They're definitely allowed in the 47 of the 58 counties across the state per the governor's guidelines. So we do have guidelines that, you know, our folks can be following once they're allowed here. But we were told by the county that we're weeks away.
Weeks away. You have to go to Modoc County to get your haircut. No, I'm kidding. Don't.
So I know
that's not an essential activity to travel for. Don't do that.
I know we're past the hour, and so I'll just end with one last question, since the weather is getting better here. What are the rules about the beaches? Just Wednesday, I rode by. People were in the water, close in proximity, throwing trash. They mentioned that there are police officers in their cars, and so what are the rules? What is the enforcement?
I'll jump in and then I'll hand this over to the chief. I know he loves talking about this, but the and on another town hall that I did, the chief was my guest, as was Ellen Corbett, who is our representative on the East Bay Regional Parks District Board, and Amy Wooldridge, our Recreation Parks Director. And the thing is, the beach is open. The beach, by the way, is East Bay Regional Parks jurisdiction, although our police department certainly works cooperatively with theirs, as they did over this past Memorial Day weekend. We want people to go to the beach. You should not be closer than 6 feet to someone on the beach who is not in your same household. That's just not safe COVID-wise. And and you should be wearing your face covering too, because your face covering protects me and mine protects you. And we need to respect each other. We need to care about someone besides ourselves. This is how we're going to get through this together. So it's pretty hard. We've, on any given day, I think East Bay Regional Parks District had 2 officers out there on the Memorial Day weekend. I don't know if our officers ended up going there or not. I saw some video, and the video days I saw, they weren't all like clustered together. It was okay. What was not okay was the trash, just all the trash that people left behind. And I think you're all enlightened, because here you are listening to this on your lunch hour. So it's the old backpacking principle. If you pack it in, pack it out. Where did somebody learn that someone else is supposed to pick up after you? I mean, did you grow up with servants? I don't know, but you're here now, and don't do that stuff. Just be responsible. I took a walk on the beach last night, and then I came back down on Shoreline, but on the residential side, and there's all this garbage in the gutters. It's like fast food or to-go containers. And I know I was talking to the chief on the phone, like he doesn't have enough to worry about. He has to listen to me griping. It's like, what do people do? They sit and they look at the nice view of the water, and then they toss their stuff out of the car. I mean, just don't do that. So we want you to use the beach, recreate, but responsibly. But Chief Rolleri, do you want to talk just briefly about the challenge of, getting people to do what they're supposed to do?
Sure. For sure. So super briefly, on the one hand, it seems probably easy for everybody to understand. Okay, we've got this pandemic going on, and people should be 6 feet apart, social distancing, and wearing masks. For the most part, Alameda's been great, and people are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. But just like with anything else, you've got people who don't. And the difficult position for a police officer right now is that the order itself, while on the surface it sounds like it'd be pretty clear, it has a bunch of exceptions in it. So if you're jogging or you're riding a bicycle, you don't have to wear a mask. If you're walking, you don't have to wear a mask unless you come within 6 feet of somebody who does not live in your same household. So put yourself in the position of a uniformed police officer driving down Shoreline Drive. You have no idea if the 3 people that you see walking together without a mask, if they live in the same household or not. And so it's really difficult for them. And what we've been trying to do is just education and to tell people and to remind people. But going back to the original reason why we're all on this call, when you talk about issues of race and things like that, it's really difficult. You go down to the beach and you've got this diverse population of people on the beach. And some people are a little closer than they should be. Some people, they might be from the same family, you're not really sure. So for us, honestly, the easiest and best way for us to do this is just to do reminders. We're not trying to be heavy-handed. I think since this started, we've probably only written about 2 or maybe 3 citations for it. And these are people who we've contacted multiple times, walking into stores, refusing to wear the mask. One woman was 3 times in 90 minutes. And so she pretty much earned herself a citation. But anyway, that's it. We're trying to just educate people. We do work with East Bay Regional Parks. They've had officers on ATVs riding up and down the beach, and I'm happy to let them do the primary enforcement down there and education, but we will come down there if we need to. The videos I saw weren't horrible. There were some people that maybe could have been a little further apart, but I also don't know that they're not all from the same household. So it's a tough one.
Well, with that, I think we're out of time. Mayor, before you end, I just want to say all of these videos, all of these town halls that the mayor does, they're all recorded and they're all up on the website. So if you go to covid19.alamedaca.gov, there's a COVID tab, and there's a video gallery with all of the town halls recorded there for folks.
Well, and I just want to thank, especially Chief Rolleri for joining us and talking about a very serious topic today. And I appreciate the candor with which you answered the questions. And thank you to all of you for joining us on your lunch hours or whatever it is, however you break up your days these days. It's really important that we continue to be compliant. And just take care of yourselves, be kind to other people. We can do that, and wear those masks. And here's the thing, even if it's only you should do it, you ought to be doing it, because when you're running, for example, you're expelling those droplets even farther than 6 feet. So either run when you're really not around anybody else, or just be really considerate of other people. Again, this is how we're going to get through this and get through this faster. But thank you all for your time and attention, and we will see you next Friday.
Bye.
Thank you. Miss
Thank you,
you all.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Chief.
Mhm.
Sarah, thank you.